He has actively avoided any kind of legal process. And so there is now even more pressure on him, whether or not there is going to be a private prosecution brought by the anti-monarchy group Republic on a whole number of factors, not least the allegations made by Virginia Giuffre, also the allegation that Andrew asked a private police protection officer to dig up the dirt effectively on his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, the tenancy of Royal Lodge, and whether or not now this may lead to police inquiries into, in particular, whether or not a police protection officer was used in such a way. I don't think this is the end of it.
The King has stripped Andrew of his Prince title. No more Prince Andrew. No more Duke of York. No more Royal Lodge. The first 9 words in the Times today are an indication of what's happened to the King's younger brother, allegedly the Queen's favourite son in the past few weeks. Only 13 days ago, we were told that Andrew was voluntarily opting not to use his Duke of York title anymore. Now he's lost the Prince title altogether. Well, we're going to ask the government minister about the thinking on Whitehall this morning about how the government will implement the palace's decision. We're going to hear from royal historians and experts throughout the programme.
In just a moment, you'll hear from royal correspondent Sarah Hewson about where we're at with all of this morning. But first, let's recap the fall from grace, really, of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor due to his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Let's remember how we've got to this point.
So this started, really, this story in 1999. Andrew is believed to have been introduced to Jeffrey Epstein by their mutual friend, Ghislaine Maxwell.
A year later, in June 2000, Maxwell and Epstein are guests at a party hosted by Queen Elizabeth at Windsor Castle.
In December of that year, Andrew then hosted a shooting weekend at Sandringham. Epstein was among the guests.
March 2001 is when Virginia Giuffre alleges that as a 17-year-old she met Prince Andrew where they dined and danced at Tramp nightclub in London, where she said famously that Andrew sweated profusely. She says later that she had sex with the Prince at Maxwell's home in Belgravia.
Now, in December 2010, Andrew is then photographed walking around Central Park in New York with Epstein after the businessman's conviction and release from prison for the sexual exploitation of children. Andrew said he ended his friendship with Epstein after this.
It was February 2011 when Prince Andrew wrote to Epstein saying, "We are in this together," after a photograph of Andrew's arm was published around Virginia Giuffre's waist. The email was sent 2 months after Andrew claimed to have broken off contact with Epstein. He's always denied any wrongdoing in any connection with Virginia Giuffre.
So in April 2015, Andrew was then named in court papers as part of a US civil case against Jeffrey Epstein. Well, Virginia Giuffre claims she was forced to have sex with Andrew on 3 occasions in London, New York and on Epstein's private island. Andrew denies those allegations.
In May 2018, Andrew invited Kai Qi, a senior figure in China's Communist Party and a close ally of President Xi, into Buckingham Palace for lunch. Qi is the Chinese official at the centre of the Beijing spy case.
And in August 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell in New York, having been rearrested and charged with sex trafficking.
In November 2019, Andrew was interviewed on Newsnight by Emily Maitlis, during which he claims he could not have had sex with Giuffre because her description of him sweating while dancing could not be true. He is unable to sweat. The interview is deemed so disastrous that shortly afterwards he announces he'll be stepping back from public duties.
Now, that story was dominating headlines ahead of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So take us to February 2022. Andrew settled a civil case brought against him by Giuffre for a reported £12 million, but there was no admission of liability.
After 13 days ago, on Saturday, October the 18th, Andrew announced he'd be giving up his Duke of York title, but would stay in Royal Lodge and remain as Prince Andrew. That has now changed.
And so he loses the title of Prince. Well, the lawyer, Gloria Allred, represented victims of Jeffrey Epstein. She says there's still more that Andrew can do.
I think it was the appropriate thing to do. There should have been a consequence for Andrew. This is a serious consequence. On the other hand, I think there's still more that he could do. What he could do would be what I've been urging him to do for many, many years, publicly urging him, and that is that he should volunteer to speak to law enforcement in the United States, either United States Attorney's Office in New York, which asked to speak to him, and he declined the interview, which would have been an interview in which he would have been legally required to tell the truth, which he was not legally required to do on the BBC when he did that a catastrophic interview that he did on television years ago. But I think now also Congress, the Oversight Committee in the House of Representatives in the United States, is conducting an investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. And I think that they would be very interested in speaking with Andrew. And he could do that without being subpoenaed. He could volunteer to do that. I think that would certainly help his reputation. He could, if it's true, he could continue to deny any involvement with Virginia Giuffre or anyone else, but he should volunteer to be interviewed and tell what he knows. After all, he did stay for certain periods of time at different residences of Jeffrey Epstein in New York and also other residences. So I think it's long overdue for him to say what he knows. It certainly would be welcomed by many, many, many victims of Jeffrey Epstein.
That is the lawyer, Gloria Allred, who represented victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Well, the royal correspondent Sarah Hewson joins us now. Sarah, good morning.
Morning, Rosie.
We heard from the palace. They say the king was determined to do the right thing, not the rushed thing. Clearly, it had reached a point where Andrew retaining that title was untenable.
Certainly had, and the pressure was getting very, very strong on the royal family to be seen to be doing something decisive and concrete. Just under 2 weeks ago, when we were told that Prince Andrew was voluntarily giving up his Duke of York title, that was not enough in any way, shape or form to assuage the public anger. And so now we have this very, very firm hand that has been taken by the king to his younger brother, Andrew, now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and banished to a private property on the Sandringham estate. He's been clinging on in Royal Lodge for years now, despite the best efforts of the king to get him out. Finally, he has found a way. And I think there have been some very, very difficult conversations over the past couple of weeks. There have been legal, there have been constitutional ramifications. But yesterday, we got the culmination of that with this unprecedented statement from Buckingham Palace that Andrew is to be stripped of all titles and removed from public life, hoping now that this really does put a distance between the royal family and Andrew and that very toxic association with Jeffrey Epstein.
What was very clear in the statement from the palace yesterday, I mean, the tone of it was quite surprising, but they said they wanted to make clear their thoughts, their sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and the survivors of any and all forms of abuse. They clearly wanted to express that in no uncertain terms.
Absolutely. And that really stood out to me, Rosie, because that has been so distinctly lacking from anything that we have had from Andrew. Think about the Newsnight interview, the opportunities that he was given to apologise, express regret for his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and his sympathy and support for the victims of Epstein. Even in that statement when he announced that he was giving up his Duke of York title, still then, no sympathy, no thoughts whatsoever to the victims. And I think that was brought into sharp focus by the publication of Virginia Giuffre's posthumous autobiography, Nobody's Girl, which is one of the most harrowing and disturbing accounts of a young girl who has been trafficked to powerful men. Now, Andrew has always denied the allegations made by Virginia Giuffre, but as Buckingham Palace said, notwithstanding that, he has made some serious errors of judgment, and those errors of judgments have cast a shadow over him and the entire royal family. The stain has spread now. It has been spreading across the family and across the institution of the monarchy. There was a real danger here that Andrew was going to do permanent damage to the royal family and the monarchy as a whole, and the king had to act.
Yeah, if he hadn't already inflicted that permanent damage.
Well, true.
who is sort of leading and spearheading these conversations behind the scene? The King, the Queen, William?
Well, interesting. There will be a lot of interested parties here. These discussions, we're told, were very much led by the King. His brother did not object. Prince William very much part of them supporting his father's action. These have been done in discussion with the wider family and with the support of the wider family. You mentioned the Queen there, and very pertinent, that last line of the statement, with their thoughts with the victims of any form of abuse, because absolutely core to the work of Queen Camilla is supporting victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence, as it is for Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. So for them to have had Prince Andrew, I say Prince Andrew, we now have to call him Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, don't we? Because that stripping of titles takes place with immediate effect. To have Andrew within their midst is so very damaging to them. And so I think there have certainly been wider family discussions, but ultimately led by the King. It had to be his decision. It was his prerogative. And the way in which he has done this has been within his power rather than having to go to Parliament.
We heard from Gloria Allred talking about, what Andrew could do in terms of any action that would help those victims. And of course, he does still deny his involvement. Do you think it is likely that Andrew would sort of volunteer to provide any evidence either to police or to victims' lawyers?
Well, the clamour is growing for that, isn't it? He did indeed say when he reached his settlement with Virginia Giuffre in the year of the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee that he would help with any inquiries. Well, we haven't seen any evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, he has actively avoided any kind of legal process. And so there is now even more pressure on him, whether or not there is going to be a private prosecution brought by the anti-monarchy group Republic on a whole number of factors, not least the allegations made by Virginia Giuffre, also the allegation that Andrew asked a private police protection officer to dig up the dirt effectively on his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, the tenancy of Royal Lodge, and whether or not now this may lead to police inquiries into, in particular, whether or not a police protection officer was used in such a way. I don't think this is the end of it. Andrew is being distanced and banished from the royal family, sent into exile in Norfolk. We don't exactly know where. We're told not at Wood Farm, which was the home used by the Duke of Edinburgh when he went into a retirement. There is York Cottage there, which is potentially a property for the former Duke of York. May well be a reminder of everything that he has lost, mightn't it? But isn't Christmas going to be awkward, Rosie, when the entire family descends on the Sandringham estate and Andrew is not invited?
Thank you so much, Sarah Hewson, the royal correspondent, on the latest that we've heard from the palace. The question is to what extent he will now be out of sight, out of mind. That's definitely the intention behind the King's action that we've heard of. This statement from Buckingham Palace about 7 p.m. last night will continue to sort of scrutinise what happens next, the repercussions for the royal family and also for the victims on the programme today.